The words left his mouth without hesitation, without warmth, without the slightest acknowledgment that 3 months ago, this same mouth had whispered promises against her skin in the darkness of his office. Go have the baby alone. Eleanor Vaughan stood before his desk, her hands clasped to stop their trembling, watching the man she thought she knew become someone entirely unrecognizable. I came here because you deserve to know, she said, her voice steady despite the devastation spreading through her chest. Because I believed the man who told me about his late wife, who listened when I talked about growing up in foster care, that man would want to know he was going to be a father. Marcus Ashford did not look up from the documents on his desk. His pen continued moving across paper as though she had not just delivered news that should have stopped the world. That man was a momentary lapse in judgment, he replied. I do not do relationships, Eleanor. I certainly do not do families. And I will not be manipulated into one by someone clever enough to recognize an opportunity when she sees it. The accusation struck her like a physical blow. You think I planned this? She whispered. I think the timing is remarkably convenient. A contracted analyst with no savings and a history of financial instability. A wealthy widower in a vulnerable moment. The mathematics are not complicated. Eleanor felt something fundamental collapse inside her chest. This was not the man who had held her while confessing his failures as a father to his grown children. This was not the man who had listened to her stories of 17 foster homes without pity, only understanding. This was a stranger wearing Marcus Ashford's face, speaking with his voice, destroying everything she had allowed herself to believe. I am not asking for your money, she said quietly. Then what are you asking for? Your presence. Your acknowledgment. The same humanity you showed me every night we talked until dawn. Marcus finally looked up. His eyes held nothing she recognized. Handle this however you choose. But do not expect me to participate in whatever scheme this represents. The door behind her seemed impossibly far away. Eleanor turned and walked toward it on legs that felt like water, her hand on the handle when his voice stopped her one final time. For what it is worth, he said, I did enjoy who I was when I was with you. But that person was weak. And I cannot afford weakness. Eleanor opened the door. That person was human, she replied without turning around. You will spend the rest of your life trying to remember what that felt like. She walked through the door and let it close behind her with a sound that felt like the ending of everything. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell where you're watching from and what time it is where you're at. If you're new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. To understand how Eleanor Vaughan came to be standing in that office, heart-shattering while the father of her child dismissed her as a schemer, we must return to the beginning. To a Monday morning 6 months earlier, when she walked into Ashford Development headquarters carrying nothing but a leather portfolio and a reputation for solving problems no one else could solve. The company had financial irregularities that 5 previous consultants had failed to identify. Millions of dollars moving through systems in patterns that made no sense. Board members growing nervous. Auditors circling. Marcus Ashford had hired Eleanor as a last resort before the federal investigators arrived. She entered his corner office for the first time wearing a charcoal suit that had seen better days and shoes she had resold twice because replacing them was not in her budget. Her natural hair was pulled back in a professional style. Her portfolio contained 6 years of forensic analysis work that had saved companies far larger than his. Marcus barely looked up from his phone when his assistant made the introduction. 3 months, he said without preamble. If you cannot find the problem by then, no one can. His tone suggested he did not expect her to succeed. Eleanor studied him for a moment before responding. She noted the exhaustion around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like a man accustomed to disappointment. I will find it in 6 weeks, she said calmly. The problem is not in your numbers, Mr. Ashford. It is in the gap between what your division heads report and what actually happens. Someone is lying to you. I will discover who. For the first time, Marcus Ashford truly looked at her. Most people who entered his office trembled slightly. They deferred to his wealth, his reputation, his known intolerance for inadequacy. This woman with the second-hand suit and the direct gaze looked at him as though he was simply another puzzle to solve. That is a significant claim to make without evidence, he said. I do not make claims I cannot support. Give me access to your financial systems and personnel files. I will have your answer before the month ends. He granted the access. He told himself it was because he was desperate. He did not yet understand that something far more complicated had already begun. Eleanor delivered in 4 weeks. The irregularity traced to Marcus's own nephew, placed in a vice president position through family obligation rather than merit. The young man had been siphoning funds through ghost vendor accounts for nearly 2 years, confident that his family connection would protect him from scrutiny. Eleanor presented her findings on a Thursday evening after the office had emptied. She laid out the evidence methodically, spreadsheet by spreadsheet, transaction by transaction, the careful documentation of betrayal by blood. Marcus reviewed the materials in silence. His jaw tightened progressively as the scope of the theft became clear. "You are certain of this," he said finally. "I do not present conclusions I am not certain of," Eleanor replied. "I understand this is difficult given the family relationship." Difficult. Marcus set down the final report. The word does not begin to cover it. He looked at her across the conference table, this woman who had just handed him proof that his own sister's son had been stealing from him while smiling at family dinners. "Most consultants would soften this," he said. "Present it gradually. Give me time to process before delivering the full scope. You hired me to find the truth, Mr. Ashford. Truth does not benefit from softening." Something shifted in his expression. Not gratitude exactly, but something adjacent to it. Recognition, perhaps. The acknowledgment of someone who operated by the same principles he claimed to value. "What would you recommend I do?" he asked. "That is not within my contract scope." "I am asking anyway." Eleanor considered her response carefully. "Handle it quietly. Confront him privately. Give him the option of resignation with repayment versus criminal charges and public disgrace. Protect your sister's relationship with you if you can. But do not let family sentiment override the necessity of consequences." Marcus studied her for a long moment. "You are wasted on temporary contract work," he said. Eleanor began gathering her materials. "That is kind of you to say." It was not kindness. It was observation. He stood as well. "I want you to stay on. Permanently. The salary would be substantial." "I cannot accept that," Eleanor said, continuing to organize her papers. The refusal caught him off guard. People did not refuse Marcus Ashford. Why not? Eleanor paused. She could have deflected, could have offered a professional excuse, could have maintained the careful boundaries she had constructed around her personal life. Instead, for reasons she did not fully understand, she told him the truth. "I am supporting someone through rehabilitation. A woman I grew up with in the foster system. She needs financial help I cannot provide if I give up my other contract income. A permanent position would require exclusivity I cannot afford right now." Marcus processed this information. He noted the way she spoke of her obligation not as a burden but as a fact. He noted that she had revealed personal struggle without seeking sympathy, had explained her constraints without asking him to solve them. "What if I matched your other income?" he said. "Provided benefits that would cover additional expenses. Considered it a signing bonus for exceptional work." "Why would you do that?" "Because losing you would cost me more than keeping you." Eleanor met his eyes. Something unspoken passed between them in that moment. A recognition of two people who had learned to guard themselves carefully, who did not offer trust easily, who understood what it meant to survive alone. "I will consider it," she said finally. She stayed. The weeks that followed blurred the line between professional and personal in ways neither intended. Late nights reviewing quarterly projections became late nights talking about things that had nothing to do with business. Marcus would order dinner. Eleanor would argue that expensive takeout was wasteful when sandwiches would serve the same purpose. They would eat surrounded by spreadsheets and slowly reveal the histories they had buried deep. Marcus told her about his father first. A man who built the foundation of this company through cruelty and control. Who told a young Marcus that emotion was weakness and love was leverage. Who drove Marcus's mother into a depression she never escaped, then blamed her for her own suffering. "I spent my entire life trying not to become him," Marcus said one evening, staring at the city lights beyond his window. "Built an empire to prove he was wrong about me. Married a woman who made me feel human. then watched her die slowly while I closed deals because I did not know how to be present for something I could not control. Eleanor listened without offering platitudes. When he finished, she did not tell him it would be all right or that time heals all wounds or any of the comfortable lies people offer to avoid sitting with grief. Your wife's death was not your fault, she said simply. Your absence during it might have been a choice you regret. But regret only matters if it changes what you do next. Marcus looked at her with an expression she could not read. You speak as though you understand, he said. I was a foster child, Eleanor replied. 17 different homes before I aged out at 18. Some were adequate. Most were indifferent. A few were worse. I learned early that everyone leaves eventually. That depending on anyone meant giving them power to disappoint you. That is a lonely way to live. It is a survival strategy. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Perhaps we have both been surviving, he said finally, when we could have been living. The statement hung between them, charged with meaning neither was ready to examine. Eleanor broke the moment first, returning to the spreadsheet in front of her, pretending the conversation had not shifted something fundamental. But she felt his eyes on her differently after that night. And she noticed how often she looked for him in rooms he was not supposed to be in, how his presence had become something she anticipated rather than merely tolerated. The crossing happened on a Thursday in early December. They had been working on a critical acquisition for weeks. A development deal that would either revolutionize the company's regional presence or cost them millions in failed infrastructure. The opposing team had buried liability clauses deep in supplementary documents, hidden landmines designed to detonate after signatures were complete. Eleanor found them at 2 a.m, her eyes burning from hours of reviewing fine print, her coffee long cold. She called Marcus immediately. You need to see this, she said when he answered, his voice rough with interrupted sleep. Do not sign anything tomorrow. Come to the office now. He arrived within the hour. She walked him through her discovery clause by clause, watching his expression shift from confusion to disbelief to cold fury. They would have destroyed us, he said when she finished. We would have signed, and within 6 months the liability would have bankrupted the entire development arm. Yes. And you found this at 2 a.m. I found this because I do not stop looking until I am certain nothing remains hidden. Marcus stared at her. The office was dark except for the conference room lights, the city sleeping beyond the windows, the two of them alone in a building that held 1,000 employees during daylight hours. Do you have any idea what you just saved this company? He asked. I was doing my job. No. He moved closer to her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face, the wonder beneath it. This is extraordinary work, Eleanor. This is not what anyone expects or requires. This is something else entirely. She should have stepped back. Should have maintained the professional distance that kept her safe. Instead she held her ground, met his eyes, let the silence stretch. You should go home, she said finally. Get some sleep. We can discuss strategy tomorrow. Is that what you want me to do? I think it is what we should do. That is not what I asked. The air between them felt alive with possibility and danger. Eleanor knew what would happen if she gave the honest answer. Knew that once certain lines were crossed, they could never be uncrossed. Knew that this man had the power to destroy her in ways she had spent her entire adult life protecting against. She gave the honest answer anyway. No, she said quietly. That is not what I want you to do. Marcus kissed her then, and she kissed him back, and neither of them pretended it was a mistake. The weeks after that night existed in a kind of suspended reality. Professionally, they maintained careful distance. Eleanor attended meetings she was required to attend, spoke when spoken to, offered the same direct analysis she had always provided. No one suspected anything had changed. Privately, they built a world that belonged only to them. He would come to her apartment after work, to the small tidy space that contained everything she owned. She would cook simple meals because she did not believe in wasting money on restaurants. They would talk until the city grew quiet outside her windows, learning each other's histories one confession at a time. Marcus told her about his children, grown now and distant. How his son worked across the country and called only on holidays. How his daughter had not spoken to him in 2 years after an argument about his absence during her mother's final weeks. How the house he lived in felt more like a monument to failure than a home. Eleanor told him about the foster homes. The good ones where she was treated with decency. The bad ones where she learned to become invisible. The one where a foster brother had protected her from the cruelty of foster parents, becoming the closest thing to family she had ever known. How that same foster brother had fallen into addiction as an adult, how she had pulled him out twice, how she was still paying for his current treatment because he was the only person in the world she considered worth saving. These were not stories either of them had told before. Not to therapists or colleagues or the careful acquaintances who populated professional lives. They told them to each other because something in the telling felt necessary. Like building a foundation before constructing a house. One evening Marcus asked her what she wanted from life. Not professionally. Not the careful ambitions that could be listed on a resume. What she actually wanted. Eleanor was quiet for a long time before answering. I have never been able to want things, she said finally. Wanting requires believing you might receive. I learned early that believing leads to disappointment. So I stopped wanting and started surviving. What if you could want now? Marcus asked. What if receiving were possible? She looked at him, this man who had more money than she could comprehend, who lived in a world so different from her own that it might as well have been another planet. I would want to be known, she said. Not admired or needed or useful. Just known. Completely. By someone who stayed. Marcus reached for her hand. I would like to be that person, he said. If you will let me try. Eleanor let herself believe him. She let herself believe that this man, who had built walls as high as her own, genuinely wanted to climb over them. She let herself hope, for the first time since childhood, that perhaps not everyone leaves. It was the first mistake in what would become a chain of them. The weeks continued. Winter deepened into the coldest part of the year. They did not speak about the future because the present felt precious enough. Marcus had not introduced her to anyone in his life as anything other than a valued employee. Eleanor had not asked him to. Some part of her understood that their relationship existed in a protected space, that exposing it to daylight might change it into something neither of them could control. She noticed small things without consciously registering them. The way he would cancel plans when work conflicts arose. The way he grew uncomfortable whenever she mentioned meeting his children. The way their relationship remained invisible to everyone outside her small apartment, as though he were living two separate lives and she existed only in the hidden one. She told herself it did not matter. Told herself that time would change things. Told herself that a man as guarded as Marcus Ashford needed patience, not pressure. Then one morning she woke up and knew before her feet touched the floor that everything had changed. The pregnancy test confirmed what her body had already told her. 2 pink lines appearing like a verdict. Eleanor sat on the edge of her bathtub and did mathematics she already knew would not work. She was 36 years old, alone in the world except for a foster brother in treatment, carrying the child of a man who had never introduced her to anyone who mattered to him. She spent 3 weeks trying to find the right words to tell him. In the end, there were no right words. She scheduled a meeting through his assistant, the same professional formality as when she had first arrived. She dressed carefully that morning, choosing clothes that did not yet reveal the subtle changes to her body. She rehearsed what she would say during the drive to his office, preparing for difficulty while hoping for dialogue. She was not prepared for what she found. Marcus stood behind his desk when she entered, reviewing something on his phone. He did not look up as she closed the door behind her. I have a board call in 15 minutes, he said. What is this about? Eleanor remained standing. Her hands wanted to tremble. She forced them to stay still. I need to tell you something important, she said. Can it wait? No. Marcus. She heard her voice crack slightly. Please look at me. He set down the phone with visible irritation, removing his reading glasses, finally meeting her eyes. What is it? All of her prepared speeches dissolved. The words came out simple and raw. I am pregnant. The child is yours. The silence that followed seemed to expand, filling the room, pressing against the windows. Marcus's expression shifted through a sequence she would remember for years afterward. Confusion gave way to understanding. Understanding gave way to calculation. Calculation gave way to something cold and defensive that she had never seen in him before. That is not possible, he said finally. It is not only possible, Eleanor replied. It is certain. I have been to the doctor. The timing aligns with exactly what you already know. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, and each word landed like a blade. Convenient, he said. Remarkably convenient timing. A woman with no financial security. A wealthy man in a vulnerable moment. The statistical probability of this occurring without assistance is extraordinarily low. Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her feet. What are you suggesting? I am not suggesting anything. I am observing that certain coincidences invite certain questions. You think I planned this? I think you are intelligent enough to recognize opportunity. I think you saw a lonely widower with resources and made certain calculations. Eleanor felt something between rage and despair rising in her chest. She had expected difficulty. She had prepared for uncertainty. She had not prepared for this absolute denial of her character, her history, everything she had revealed to him in trust. I have spent 6 years building a reputation for integrity, she said, her voice shaking with controlled fury. I have a graduate degree that I earned while working 3 jobs. I dedicated my professional life to uncovering dishonesty in financial systems. You know all of this. You know who I am. I know what you have shown me, Marcus replied. I have learned not to trust what people choose to show. The words destroyed whatever remained of her hope. I came here because I thought you deserved honesty, Eleanor said quietly. Because despite everything, I believed the man I knew existed. The one who told me about his failures. The one who listened to my history without judgment. I believed that man would want to know he was going to be a father. Marcus stood and walked to the window, presenting his back to her. That man was a lapse in judgment, he said. A temporary weakness I can no longer afford. Handle this however you choose. Get rid of it or keep it. But do not expect my involvement in either scenario. Eleanor stared at his back. At this man she had trusted with stories she had never told anyone. At this man who had promised to be someone who stayed. You are going to regret this, she said. Not as a threat. As a certainty. I doubt that. Maybe not today. Maybe not this year. But eventually you will understand what you destroyed here. And you will have to live with that understanding. Marcus did not turn around. Goodbye, Eleanor. She walked to the door on legs that barely functioned. Her hand rested on the handle for a moment, some small part of her still hoping he would stop her, would remember who she was to him, would acknowledge that what they had built together deserved more than clinical dismissal. He did not. She opened the door and walked through it and let it close behind her and felt the end of everything she had allowed herself to believe. The termination email arrived the next morning. Eleanor stared at it on her phone screen, reading the clinical language that reduced her to a security risk requiring immediate removal. Building access revoked. Company property to be collected by security personnel. Final payment to be processed within standard timeframes. She had expected it. Somehow that made it worse. For 3 days she did not leave her apartment. She lay on her couch staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, searching for signs she had missed, wondering how she could have been so catastrophically wrong about another person. The man who had held her in the darkness of her apartment, who had traced the lines of her face with gentle fingers, who had asked what she wanted from life and promised to be the person who gave it to her. That man had looked at her across his desk and accused her of calculated manipulation. That man had told her to handle the baby alone. On the 4th morning, Eleanor forced herself upright. She had survived abandonment before. She had survived foster homes that tried to break her. She had survived an economic system that punished people for being born without resources. She would survive Marcus Ashford. She showered. She dressed. She made herself eat something small even though the thought of food made her ill. Then she sat at her small kitchen table and began the work of rebuilding. The first week was applications and phone calls and carefully worded emails to professional contacts who might have openings suitable for her skills. The responses came slowly at first, then slowed further, then stopped entirely. Word traveled fast in their industry. Eleanor Vaughan had been terminated from Ashford Development. No reason given publicly, but rumors suggested personal impropriety. Associating with someone Marcus Ashford wanted gone was professional suicide. She adjusted her approach. Applied to positions outside her usual scope. Contacted companies in adjacent fields. Lowered her salary requirements again and again until she was asking for barely more than entry-level compensation. Still the doors remained closed. Her savings, modest to begin with, began to drain. Medical appointments for prenatal care were expensive even with the basic insurance she had maintained through her contracts. The support she had been providing to her foster brother in treatment became impossible to continue. She called the rehabilitation facility with a trembling voice. "I need to reduce my contribution," she told the administrator. "I am experiencing financial difficulties." A pause on the other end of the line. "I understand," the administrator said carefully. "But you should know that without full payment, we cannot guarantee his continued placement in the program." Eleanor closed her eyes. "What are my options?" "There are waiting lists for subsidized programs. Several months at minimum. In the meantime, if he is discharged without completing treatment, the likelihood of relapse is significant." She sat with that information for a long moment. Then she made a decision that felt like choosing between drowning slowly or drowning quickly. "Keep him in the program," she said. "I will find the money somehow." She did not know how she would find it. She only knew that Michael had protected her when they were children together in a house where protection was not guaranteed. She could not abandon him now. The ultrasound appointment arrived like any other day on the calendar. Eleanor went alone, as she had gone to every appointment alone. She lay on the examination table while the technician prepared the equipment, feeling the cold gel on her stomach, watching the screen flicker to life with images that meant nothing to her untrained eye. The technician was quiet for longer than seemed normal. Moving the wand. Adjusting angles. Studying the screen with an expression Eleanor could not read. "Is something wrong?" Eleanor asked, her heart rate accelerating. The technician smiled suddenly, broadly. "No, nothing wrong at all. Quite the opposite, actually." She pointed at the screen. "Do you see here, and here, and here?" Eleanor looked. She saw shapes that might have been anything. "I do not know what I am looking at." "You are looking at 3 separate heartbeats," the technician said. "You are carrying triplets." The word did not make sense at first. Eleanor's mind processed it slowly, syllable by syllable. "Triplets," she repeated. 3. 3 babies. Yes. I can see them clearly. All 3 heartbeats are strong. Congratulations. Eleanor stared at the screen where 3 tiny lives pulsed with existence. Not 1 child. 3. 3 mouths to feed. 3 bodies to clothe. 3 educations to provide. 3 of everything she had barely been able to imagine providing for one. The room began to spin. "Are you all right?" the technician asked, her voice suddenly concerned. "You have gone very pale." Eleanor gripped the edges of the examination table. "I need a moment," she managed. The technician gave her the moment. Gave her several moments. Waited while Eleanor's breathing gradually steadied, while color slowly returned to her face, while the reality of triplets settled into something she could almost comprehend. She drove home afterward in a state of shocked numbness. Parked in front of her building. Sat in her car staring at the steering wheel. Then she screamed. She screamed until her throat burned raw. Until her voice cracked and gave out. Until the fear and rage and terror found somewhere to go besides eating her alive from the inside. When the screaming stopped, she placed both hands on her stomach where 3 lives were growing. 3 children whose father had told her to handle the baby alone. 3 children who would never know how completely their father had rejected their existence. "We are going to figure this out," she whispered to them. "I do not know how yet. But I promise you. I promise I will figure it out." She had no idea how she would keep that promise. She only knew that breaking it was not an option. The eviction notice arrived 2 weeks later. Her landlord was apologetic but firm. Building policy prohibited single mothers with multiple infants. Too much noise. Too much liability. She had 30 days to vacate. Eleanor did not argue. She did not have the energy for arguments that would not change outcomes. She simply nodded and closed the door and added housing to the list of emergencies she needed to solve. The 30 days passed in a blur of increasingly desperate phone calls. She contacted every housing program she could find. Filled out applications that required her to quantify her circumstances in boxes and check marks. Annual income, minimal. Savings, depleted. Support system, none. Number of dependents, 3 incoming. She qualified for emergency housing assistance. The waiting list was 8 months. The babies were due in 5. She found the shelter on day 27. The shelter for women in crisis occupied a converted school building on the far side of the city. The hallways still had that institutional feel of cinderblock and fluorescent lighting. The staff moved with the practiced compassion of people who had seen every variation of female suffering. Eleanor checked in with 2 suitcases, a backpack, and a stomach that had grown noticeably larger. The intake coordinator reviewed her paperwork without comment. Single. Pregnant with triplets. No current income. No family support. History of stable employment now interrupted. We can take you, the coordinator said finally. Bed in a shared room. Communal meals. Access to prenatal care through our partnered clinic. It is not comfortable, but it is safe. Eleanor looked around the lobby, at the worn furniture and the faded posters about resources and rights, at the other women moving through the space with their own burdens of circumstance. This is where I am now, she thought. This is what his rejection led to. She expected despair to consume her. Instead she felt something else rising. Something stubborn and furious and absolutely unwilling to surrender. Thank you, she said to the coordinator. I appreciate the placement. She carried her belongings to the room she would share with 3 other women. Set her suitcases beneath the bed that would be hers. Lay down fully clothed and stared at the ceiling marked with water stains. She was 36 years old. Homeless. Pregnant with triplets. Carrying 3 lives whose father had denied their existence. She had been in worse situations. Foster homes where cruelty was the norm. Jobs where harassment was expected. Relationships that taught her to expect nothing because nothing was usually what she received. She had survived all of it. She would survive this too. The shelter became her world. She learned the rhythms of institutional living. Wake early before others stirred. Use the shared computers to search for remote work. Attend prenatal appointments at the partnered clinic. Eat communal meals surrounded by women whose stories were variations on her own. A woman named Grace occupied the bed next to hers. Older, perhaps 60, with silver hair and eyes that had seen more than Eleanor could imagine. Grace had been at the shelter for nearly a year, waiting for subsidized housing that never seemed to materialize. What brought you here? Grace asked one evening, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. Eleanor considered how much to reveal. Then she remembered that she had nothing left to protect. I was a financial analyst, she said. I made the mistake of trusting my employer with more than my professional skills. When I told him I was pregnant, he accused me of manipulating him and fired me the same day. Now I am here. Grace nodded slowly, as though this was a story she had heard many times before. Powerful men, she said. They take what they want and call it earned. Then they discard what they used and call it justice. I was foolish to believe him. You were human. Grace reached over and patted Eleanor's hand. Believing is not foolishness. Believing is courage. What he did with your belief reflects on him, not on you. Eleanor felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. I do not know how I am going to do this, she admitted. 3 babies. No income. No support. Grace smiled slightly. You are going to do it the same way everyone in this building does it, she said. One moment at a time. One decision at a time. One day at a time. Until the days add up to weeks and the weeks add up to months and suddenly you are somewhere else entirely. What if somewhere else is not any better? Then you keep going until it is. Grace's voice was gentle but firm. That is what survival means, child. Not thriving. Not winning. Just continuing until the continuing becomes its own kind of victory. Eleanor held those words in her heart during the weeks that followed. The pregnancy progressed with the complications she had been warned to expect. Carrying 3 babies at 36 placed extraordinary strain on her body. She developed symptoms that required bed rest for several weeks, confined to her shelter bed while the world continued without her. Grace brought her meals during that time. Sat with her during the long hours when anxiety threatened to overwhelm rational thought. Told her stories about her own life, her own losses, her own journey from comfortable middle-class existence to a bed in a women's shelter. My husband left when I was 53, Grace said one afternoon. 40 years of marriage. 3 children. 7 grandchildren. He came home one evening and announced that he had found someone who made him feel alive in ways I never had. Eleanor listened without interrupting. I thought I would die from the pain, Grace continued. Thought the betrayal would destroy me. Instead it destroyed only who I thought I was. The woman who emerged from that destruction was someone different. Stronger in some ways. More fragile in others. But still here. Still continuing. How did you rebuild? I stopped asking why it happened. Grace's eyes met Eleanor's. Why is a trap. It keeps you looking backward at things you cannot change. I started asking what now instead. What now is the only question that leads somewhere useful. Eleanor absorbed this wisdom. Applied it to her own circumstances. Stopped asking why Marcus had rejected her, why fate had given her triplets instead of one child, why the universe seemed to delight in testing her limits. She started asking what now instead. What now was a blog. The shelter had a computer lab open to residents during certain hours. Eleanor, confined to limited movement but desperate for productive purpose, began writing. Her first post was raw and unplanned. I am a single woman expecting triplets, she wrote. Their father told me to handle this alone, so I am. This is what handling it looks like. She wrote about the ultrasound that changed everything. About the shelter with its shared rooms and communal meals. About the fear that woke her at 3 a.m. and the determination that got her through to sunrise. She did not name Marcus. Did not provide identifying details. Simply documented her journey with the unflinching honesty that had always been her defining characteristic. The responses began slowly. A few comments of encouragement from strangers. Then more comments. Then shares that multiplied the audience exponentially. People connected with her refusal to perform victimhood. With her dark humor about circumstances that should have been unbearable. With her visible struggle toward something that looked like hope even when hope seemed irrational. By the time her bed rest ended, the blog had 1,000 followers. By the time labor began, it had 15,000. They arrived on a Thursday in early spring. Eleanor felt the first contractions at dawn and knew immediately this was not false labor. The pain was different. More insistent. Carrying a message she could not ignore. Grace helped her to the lobby where the shelter's emergency protocol engaged. An ambulance came. The ride to the hospital was a blur of vital signs and reassuring voices, and Eleanor's hand gripping the stretcher rails so hard her knuckles went white. The delivery room was bright and clinical and terrifying. Doctors and nurses moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for the complexity of triplet birth. Eleanor lay on the table feeling smaller than she had ever felt, more alone than she had imagined possible. She wished, in that moment, for someone whose hand she could hold. Someone who would tell her it would be all right. Someone who cared whether she survived the next few hours. She had no one. The cesarean section proceeded as planned. Eleanor remained conscious, numbed from the waist down, listening to the sounds of medical intervention without being able to see what was happening beyond the surgical drape. Then she heard it. A cry. Thin and reedy and unmistakably alive. Baby 1, someone announced. A girl. Eleanor started crying. She could not stop herself. A second cry, stronger than the first. Baby 2. Another girl. And then, after a pause that stretched her heart to breaking, a third cry. Softer. Delayed just long enough to spike her fear. Baby 3. A third girl. All present and accounted for. They brought them to her one by one. 3 tiny bodies wrapped in hospital blankets. 3 faces she would spend the rest of her life memorizing. 3 lives that depended entirely on her. Lillian, Eleanor whispered to the first. You are Lily. James, she said to the second, honoring the foster brother who had protected her in childhood. But we will call you Jamie. Rose, she named the third, for no reason except that the name felt right. The name felt like hope. She held all 3 against her chest in the recovery room afterward, marveling at their smallness, terrified by their fragility, overwhelmed by love so intense it felt like drowning. Your father chose not to know you, she told them silently. That is his loss. His profound, terrible loss. You 3 are going to be loved so completely that his absence will not leave holes. I will fill every space with enough love for 2 parents. She did not know if that was possible. She only knew she would spend her life trying. The blog post she wrote from the hospital bed reached 50,000 people within 24 hours. Lily, Jamie, and Rose. Born today. We did it. The comments overflowed with celebration, with women sharing their own stories of difficult births and impossible circumstances, with strangers who had followed her journey from shelter bed to delivery room and felt invested in her survival. Eleanor read the comments through tears of exhaustion and gratitude. Somewhere in the world, people knew she existed. People cared whether she continued. People witnessed her struggle and called it strength. It was not family. It was not the partnership she had once hoped for. But it was something. And something was more than she had ever expected to receive. The months after delivery blurred into a continuous cycle of feeding and changing and comforting and barely sleeping. Eleanor returned to the shelter with 3 infants and the blessed assistance of Grace, who had appointed herself unofficial grandmother to the triplets. The shelter administration bent rules to accommodate them, clearing a small private room that had once been a storage space, understanding that 3 crying infants in a shared room would make life unbearable for everyone. She learned to nurse 2 babies while the 3rd waited. Learned to change diapers with one hand while holding a bottle with the other. Learned to function on 3-hour sleep cycles that left her operating in a fog of exhaustion she could not escape. Her blog became her lifeline during those months. She posted updates at all hours, whenever she had a free hand and a few minutes of consciousness. She showed herself at 3 in the morning with spit up on her shoulder and bags under her eyes and 3 babies crying in stereo. "I am not going to pretend this is beautiful," she told her followers one night. "This is survival. This is brutal. This is 3 humans depending entirely on me while my body is still recovering and my brain is running on fumes. But we are still here. Every day we are still here is a victory." The honesty resonated in ways she did not anticipate. Her following grew. First tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Women who had survived their own impossible circumstances found hope in her refusal to perform false positivity. Single mothers building lives from wreckage found community in her comment sections. People who had never faced her specific struggles found themselves moved by her determination. Companies began reaching out. Diaper brands wanting to send free products. Formula companies offering sponsorships. Baby product manufacturers interested in partnerships. Eleanor accepted only what she genuinely needed. She documented every product she used, every resource she accessed, every strategy she developed. Her blog became a manual for surviving single motherhood without resources, for navigating systems designed to make you fail, for continuing when continuation seemed impossible. The shelter helped her transition to subsidized housing when the girls were 4 months old. A small apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like industrial cleaner. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that barely fit her and the triple stroller simultaneously. It was the first home Eleanor had lived in that belonged only to her. She stood in the living room on moving day, the girls asleep in their carriers, boxes stacked around her containing everything she owned. "This is ours," she whispered to her sleeping daughters. "This is where we begin." The blog continued growing. The sponsorships continued arriving. Eleanor started a small consulting business using the skills Marcus Ashford had tried to destroy, offering financial analysis to small businesses who could not afford full-time expertise. It was not wealth. It was not security. It was survival that slowly, incrementally, began looking like something more. The girls grew from infants to crawlers to toddlers. They took their first steps within days of each other, then seemed to be running everywhere simultaneously. They spoke their first words, called Eleanor Mama, laughed at things only they understood. Lily was cautious and observant, watching the world carefully before engaging. Jamie was bold and physical, climbing everything she could reach. Rose was sensitive and artistic, creating elaborate games with blocks and stuffed animals. They were becoming people. Complete humans with personalities and preferences and inner lives. Eleanor watched them develop with awe and terror and bone-deep love. She had done this. Alone. Against every reasonable expectation. She had survived Marcus Ashford's rejection and built something real from its wreckage. The blog audience reached 1 million followers when the triplets were 14 months old. Eleanor documented everything. First steps. First words. First days at the early intervention program that helped socialize multiples. Every milestone was shared with the community that had watched her journey from homeless shelter to stable housing. She never named Marcus. When followers asked about the father, she said only that he was not in the picture. That it was his choice. That she had made peace with building a life that did not include him. The peace was real. Eleanor no longer spent nights wondering what she had done wrong, no longer replayed conversations searching for the moment she could have changed his mind. She had accepted that some people were not capable of love that required sacrifice. That Marcus Ashford was one of those people. That her daughters were better off without a father who would have resented their existence. But acceptance was not forgetting. And the world had ways of forcing confrontation that acceptance could not prevent. The article appeared on a Tuesday afternoon. Eleanor was feeding the girls lunch when her phone began buzzing with notifications. Messages from followers. Alerts from media platforms. Something had happened. She opened the first message and felt the blood drain from her face. Someone had connected the dots. An anonymous tip had led a journalist to investigate the timeline of Eleanor's pregnancy. Employment records obtained through unclear channels. Dates matched against corporate filings. The article did not name Marcus Ashford explicitly, but the details were specific enough that identification required minimal effort. Billionaire executive allegedly abandoned pregnant employee after intimate relationship. The internet, as the internet does, completed the puzzle within hours. Marcus Ashford's name appeared in comment sections and social media threads. People linked to Eleanor's blog, to her photos of triplets who bore unmistakable resemblance to photographs of Marcus's family. The timeline aligned perfectly. The accusation crystallized into certainty. Eleanor watched it happen with a mixture of horror and something she could not quite name. Not satisfaction exactly. Not vengeance. Something closer to inevitability. Truth had a way of surfacing eventually. She had simply not expected it to surface quite like this. Her phone continued buzzing. Media requests for comment. Interview offers. Legal firms suggesting she pursue child support. She ignored all of them. This was not how she wanted her daughters to learn about their father. Through viral accusations and public spectacle. Through strangers debating whether their mother was victim or opportunist. But it was happening. And nothing she did would stop it now. Across the city, in a penthouse apartment that had never felt emptier, Marcus Ashford sat in darkness watching his carefully constructed world begin to crack. His phone displayed the same article Eleanor had seen. His name was appearing in contexts he could not control. Board members were calling with concerns. Sponsors were reconsidering partnerships. But these were not the things that had shattered him. The thing that shattered him was a video someone had linked in the comments. Eleanor singing to her triplets before bedtime. Her voice was terrible. The song was nonsense about butterflies and dreams. But three little girls watched her with absolute devotion, their faces turned toward their mother like she was their entire world. Three little girls who looked exactly like his mother had looked in photographs from her childhood. Three little girls whose existence he had told their mother to handle alone. Marcus watched the video 17 times before he allowed himself to understand what he was seeing. His daughters. His daughters, growing up without him, loving their mother who had survived his cruelty, building a life that did not include him because he had demanded exclusion. He had spent 18 months believing he had made the right choice. Believing Eleanor was a manipulator who had targeted his vulnerability. Believing the pregnancy was a scheme he had wisely avoided. The video destroyed every justification he had constructed. No one orchestrated what he saw in those tiny faces. No one manufactured the love visible in Eleanor's exhausted eyes. No one could fake the reality of a woman singing badly to children she would die to protect. Marcus Ashford, who had built an empire through control and calculation, who had protected himself from vulnerability by building walls no one could breach, sat in his penthouse and wept like he had not wept since his wife died. He had become exactly what he swore he would never be. His father had been emotionally absent. Marcus had been literally absent. His father had blamed others for his failures. Marcus had accused an innocent woman of manipulation to avoid facing his own cowardice. Every wall he had constructed to avoid becoming his father had led him to the same destination by a different path. The video continued playing on loop. 3 children. His children. Growing up without knowing he existed. What now? He whispered to the empty room. The question had no answer he could find. Only the beginning of understanding that whatever came next would require him to become someone he did not yet know how to be. The invitation arrived in Eleanor's mailbox 3 weeks after the article went viral. A charity gala benefiting programs for single parents and struggling families. Eleanor had been asked to speak about her journey, to share the story that had inspired so many, to represent the resilience that her followers had witnessed. She accepted, not because she wanted public attention, but because the organization had helped shelter residents during her time there. Because saying yes might help other women in circumstances like her own. Because her daughters deserved a mother who used her voice for something larger than survival. The gala was scheduled for a Saturday evening in autumn. Lily, Jamie, and Rose would be 18 months old. Walking now. Talking in fragments. Becoming more themselves every day. Eleanor prepared her speech with care. Not a tale of victimhood. Not an accusation against the man who had abandoned her. A story about community and determination and the difference between charity and genuine support. She did not know, as she prepared her words, that Marcus Ashford had obtained an invitation to the same event. She did not know that he had spent the past weeks in transformation. Therapy sessions where he examined his failures without flinching. Volunteer work at a community center that served families like the one he had abandoned. Attempts to contact her that she had refused, doors closed firmly against his guilt and sudden interest. She did not know that he would arrive at the gala carrying nothing but the hope that she might allow him to begin earning what he had forfeited. She knew only that she was going to speak truth to a room full of strangers, in a dress purchased with money she had earned through her own determination, with 3 daughters waiting at home who represented everything she had refused to surrender. The day of the gala arrived. Eleanor dressed carefully in an emerald gown that made her feel powerful instead of pretty. She arranged for childcare through the trusted network she had built. She reviewed her speech one final time, adjusting phrases, ensuring her message was clear. The venue was a converted industrial space, warmly lit and carefully decorated. Eleanor arrived early, walking through the room that would soon hold hundreds of people, touching the lectern where she would stand, imagining the faces that would watch her tell her story. She did not notice the man who arrived later, who found a seat in the back corner, who watched her with an expression that held equal parts devastation and hope. She did not notice him because she had stopped looking for him months ago. But he noticed her. He noticed everything about her. The way she carried herself with quiet authority. The way staff members approached her with respect rather than pity. The way she had become someone who commanded rooms instead of servicing them. She had survived him. More than survived. She had thrived. And now, as the gala began and guests filled seats and speeches commenced, Marcus Ashford sat in the back of the room understanding that whatever happened next was not about his redemption. It was about whether she would allow him the chance to try. The lights dimmed. The program began. And somewhere in that room, 2 people who had once built something between them prepared to face what remained when everything false had been stripped away. The gala hummed with the particular energy of people who had gathered for a cause they genuinely believed in. This was not the usual charity circuit where wealthy attendees wrote checks to assuage guilt they would forget by morning. The Metro Area Family Support Foundation had built something different. Real programs. Real impact. Real families whose lives had been transformed by intervention at critical moments. Eleanor stood backstage, reviewing her notes one final time, listening to the program unfold through the curtain that separated her from the audience. Previous speakers had shared stories of struggle and recovery. A father who had rebuilt his life after job loss and near homelessness. A grandmother raising grandchildren after tragedy claimed their parents. Each story landed with emotional weight that Eleanor could feel even from her hidden position. Her turn approached. A staff member touched her elbow gently. 5 minutes, Ms. Vaughan. Are you ready? Eleanor folded her notes and placed them in her small clutch. She would not need them. What she had to say had been living inside her for 18 months. The words would come when she needed them. I am ready, she said. She walked to the wings of the small stage, watching the current speaker conclude, listening to the applause that followed, feeling her heartbeat accelerate as the moment arrived. The foundation director approached the microphone. Our next speaker needs little introduction to many of you, the director said. Her journey from crisis to stability has inspired hundreds of thousands of followers online. But more importantly, her advocacy for single parents has helped shape policy discussions at the state level. Please welcome Eleanor Vaughan. The applause began as Eleanor walked into the light. She had stood before audiences before, presented findings to hostile boardrooms, defended conclusions to executives who did not want to hear them. But this was different. This audience was not evaluating her competence. They were witnessing her survival. She reached the lectern and looked out at the faces before her. Hundreds of people seated at round tables, their attention focused entirely on her. Staff members along the walls. Media representatives with cameras positioned at approved angles. And in the back corner, almost hidden in shadow, a face she would have recognized anywhere. Marcus Ashford. Eleanor's breath caught for just a moment. Then she steadied herself, looked away from him, and began to speak. "Thank you for that introduction," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room's sound system. "And thank you all for being here tonight. Your presence means more than you know to the families this foundation serves." She paused, gathering herself. "I was asked to share my story," she continued. "The journey from homelessness to stability. From crisis to something approaching normalcy. I will share that story. But first, I want to talk about something more fundamental. About the difference between charity and community." The room was silent, attentive. "Charity says I am helping you because you are beneath me," Eleanor said. "It is hierarchical. It flows downward from those who have to those who lack. And while charity serves important functions, it carries within it an implicit judgment. You are struggling because of something deficient in you. I am stable because of something superior in me." She let that land before continuing. "Community says something different. Community says I am helping you because we are in this together. Because your struggle could have been my struggle under different circumstances. Because the systems that failed you could fail any of us. Community is horizontal. It does not flow from superior to inferior. It flows between equals." Eleanor looked around the room, meeting eyes where she could. "Most of you know my story through the filtered lens of social media," she said. "You know that I was pregnant and alone. That I spent months in a shelter. That I delivered triplets without a partner present. That I built something from nothing through determination and the support of people who refused to let me disappear." She paused. "What you may not know is that I was not always alone. I made the mistake of trusting someone who was not capable of the trust one offered. When I told him I was pregnant, he accused me of manipulation. He suggested that my pregnancy was a calculated scheme to access his resources. He told me to handle the baby alone." The room remained utterly silent. He did not know I was carrying triplets. Neither did I at that point. But even if I had been carrying one child, his response would have been the same. He looked at a woman he had held in his arms and saw only a threat to be eliminated. Eleanor's voice remained steady, controlled. "I am not telling you this to invite sympathy or to seek vengeance against someone who wronged me. I am telling you this because it illustrates something essential about how our society treats women in crisis. When I entered that shelter, I was not met with judgment from the women around me. They did not ask what I had done to deserve my circumstances. They asked what I needed to survive them." She smiled slightly. "That is community. That is what this foundation builds. Not programs that make donors feel virtuous while recipients feel diminished. Programs that recognize the fundamental dignity of every person in crisis. Programs that say your struggle does not define your worth." The applause began, but Eleanor raised her hand slightly. "I have one more thing to say," she continued. "Something personal." She looked toward the front row where staff members sat with her prepared materials. "My daughters are 18 months old now," she said. "Lily, Jamie, and Rose. They are the reason I survived. Not because survival was easy or natural, but because giving up was not an option when 3 lives depended entirely on me." Her voice softened. "When they are older, they will learn the full truth about their father. They will learn that he chose absence over presence, that he chose his comfort over their existence, that he rejected them before they were born. And when that day comes, I want them to know something important." Eleanor paused, feeling the weight of what she was about to say. They were wanted. So desperately wanted. By me. By the community that surrounded me. By strangers who followed our journey and celebrated every milestone. Their father's rejection does not diminish their value. It diminishes only him. The applause that followed was different from before. Louder. Sustained. People rising from their seats in acknowledgment of something that had moved them deeply. Eleanor stepped back from the lectern, her part complete, her truth spoken. She did not look toward the back corner where Marcus Saturday. She did not need to see his reaction. His reaction was his to carry. She had said what needed saying and would not modify it for his comfort. The program continued. Other speakers followed. Eleanor found her assigned seat near the front of the room and attempted to focus on the words being spoken around her. But she felt his eyes on her throughout the evening. Felt his presence in the room like a physical weight. Knew that something was approaching that she could not prevent. The confrontation came during the reception. Eleanor was standing near the refreshment table, speaking with the foundation director about potential future collaborations, when she felt the air around her change. The director's expression shifted subtly. Eyes widened with recognition and something adjacent to alarm. Eleanor turned. Marcus stood 3 feet away. He looked older than she remembered. The months had not been kind to him. She could see exhaustion around his eyes, a hollowness in his cheeks that suggested sleepless nights and difficult reckonings. He wore an expensive suit that hung on him differently than his clothes once had, as though he had lost weight he could not afford to lose. "Eleanor," he said. His voice was barely audible. She did not respond. Simply looked at him with an expression that offered nothing. "I know I have no right to be here," he continued. "No right to approach you. No right to ask for anything. But I need to say something, and if you want me to leave after I say it, I will leave." The foundation director stepped back slightly, uncertain whether to intervene. Eleanor remained silent, her eyes fixed on Marcus, her expression unchanged. "I was wrong," Marcus said. The words seemed to cost him something physical. "Everything I said to you in that office was wrong. Every accusation, every assumption, every word I used to protect myself from facing what I had done." His hands trembled visibly. "I told you to handle the baby alone," he continued. "I did not know there were 3 of them. But even if there had been one, my response was monstrous. I looked at a woman who had given me her trust, who had shared things with me she had never shared with anyone, and I called her a manipulator because facing my own cowardice was unbearable." Eleanor still did not speak. "I have spent the past months trying to understand how I became someone capable of that cruelty," Marcus said. "Therapy. Reflection. Volunteer work at a center that serves families I would once have dismissed without thought. I have examined every failure that led me to that office, to those words, to the destruction of everything you offered me." His voice broke slightly. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I know I have not earned it. I may never earn it. I am asking only for the chance to begin trying. To be present in my daughter's lives in whatever capacity you will allow. To prove through action that I have changed, am changing, will continue changing for as long as it takes." The room around them had gone quiet. People were watching, recognizing the significance of what was unfolding without fully understanding its context. Eleanor looked at this man who had destroyed her life 18 months ago. This man who had accused her of schemes when she had offered honesty. This man who was now standing before her with tears on his face, asking for something she had every right to deny. She felt the weight of everything she had carried alone. The shelter beds. The difficult pregnancy. The cesarean delivery without a hand to hold. The endless nights of crying infants and exhausted desperation. The slow, painful construction of a life from the ashes of what he had burned. He had not been there for any of it. He had chosen not to be there. And now he stood before her asking for access to the daughters he had told her to handle alone. "Not here," Eleanor said finally. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Not like this. If you want to have this conversation, we will have it privately. Tomorrow. At a place of my choosing." Marcus nodded immediately. "Whatever you require," he said. "Whatever conditions you set. I will meet them." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, reading his face for the manipulation she had once failed to see. She found only desperation. Only shame. Only the hollow devastation of a man confronting consequences he could not escape. "My assistant will contact yours with details," she said. "Be there on time. Do not bring lawyers or advisors or anyone whose presence suggests you are managing me rather than listening to me." "I understand." "And Marcus." Eleanor's voice carried an edge that made him flinch. "If this is performance, if you are here because your public image requires rehabilitation rather than because you genuinely want to know your daughters, I will discover that. And there will be no second chances." "It is not performance," he said quietly. "I have nothing left to perform for. Everything I built to protect myself has already crumbled. I am not here because I want to be seen as reformed. I am here because I want to actually be reformed. There is a difference. We will see, Eleanor replied. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the reception, surrounded by strangers who had witnessed his humiliation without understanding its depths. The meeting happened the next afternoon. Eleanor had chosen a neutral location, a small conference room at the community center where she sometimes spoke to groups of single mothers. The space was modest, functional, nothing like the opulent office where Marcus had rejected her 18 months before. She arrived first, arranged the chairs so they would face each other without a table between them. No barriers. No protection. Just two people and the truth that had been deferred for too long. Marcus arrived precisely on time. He wore simpler clothes than she had ever seen him in. No designer labels visible. Just a plain button-down shirt and dark trousers. He looked like a man who had stopped caring about the signals his clothing sent. He sat in the chair she indicated without speaking. Waited for her to begin. Eleanor studied him for a moment before she did. I need you to understand something, she said. I am not having this conversation because you deserve it. I am having it because my daughters deserve to know where they came from, if the person they come from proves worth knowing. This is about them. Not about you. Not about us. Them. I understand, Marcus said. I do not think you do, Eleanor replied. Not fully. You have spent your entire life being the center of every room you enter. The most important person in every conversation. I need you to understand that in this context, you are not important at all. Lily, Jamie, and Rose are important. What you can offer them is important. You, as an individual, with your needs and your guilt and your desire for redemption, you are irrelevant. Marcus absorbed this without visible reaction. I understand, he said again. And I accept it. Good. Eleanor leaned back slightly. Now tell me what you think you have to offer 3 children who have never met you, who have been raised without any awareness of your existence, who are happy and healthy and thriving without your involvement. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his response. I do not know yet, he admitted. I have not been a father in any meaningful sense for decades. My own children barely speak to me because I failed them in exactly the ways I am failing here now. I have no illusions about my qualifications. Then why should I allow you near my daughters? Because they are also my daughters. His voice cracked slightly. And because despite my failures, I believe I can learn. I believe I can become someone who offers something of value. Not money or resources or advantages I can purchase. Something real. Presence. Attention. Time. The things I never gave my first children and regret more than I can express. Eleanor watched his face as he spoke. You understand that trust must be built over years, she said. Not weeks. Not months. Years of consistent behavior. Years of showing up when it is inconvenient. Years of prioritizing their needs over your own. I understand. You understand that I will not allow you unsupervised access to them for a very long time. That every interaction will be on my terms, in my space, under my observation. I understand. You understand that if you make promises to them and break those promises, I will end your access permanently. Children cannot be collateral damage in your journey towards self-improvement. I understand. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. Why now? She asked finally. You have known about the triplets for weeks. Known that the article identified you. Known that your paternity was effectively public. Why did you wait until the gala? Why the public approach? Marcus looked at his hands. Because I needed time to become someone worth approaching you as, he said. When I first saw the video of you with them, I wanted to come immediately. To fix it. To throw money and resources at the situation and call that sufficient. That is what I have always done. Identified problems and applied solutions without considering whether my solutions addressed the actual need. He looked up at her. But this is not a problem to be solved. This is a life I damaged and people I abandoned. You cannot solve abandonment with a checkbook. You can only begin to address it through sustained presence and genuine change. I needed time to start that change before I could ask you to witness it. What change have you started? I attend therapy twice a week, Marcus said. I have been going for 3 months. We discuss my father, my failures with my first children, the way I have used control as a substitute for connection. It is not pleasant. I do not enjoy it. But I have not missed a session. He continued. I volunteer at the Riverside Family Center 4 days a week. Kitchen work. Set up. Clean up. Manual labor. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that would make a good photograph for my rehabilitation. I do it because that center serves families like yours, and I wanted to understand what I had dismissed without consideration. Eleanor's expression remained unreadable. The women there did not know who I was at first, Marcus said. They accepted me as just another volunteer. I learned their stories. Heard about husbands who left. Employers who exploited. Systems that failed. I heard echoes of what I had done to you in a dozen different variations. And I began to understand that my cruelty was not exceptional. It was typical. Just another version of what powerful men do to vulnerable women when vulnerability becomes inconvenient. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand that my change is not for show. That it has been happening in spaces where no one was watching, where there was no audience to perform for. That I am trying to become different because being who I was became unbearable, not because becoming someone else offers strategic advantages. Eleanor considered this. Words are easy, she said finally. Change is proved through time. I know. Then we will see what time reveals. She stood. You can meet them on Saturday. Briefly. At my apartment. I will be present for every moment. If they seem uncomfortable, the meeting ends immediately. If you do anything that concerns me, the meeting ends immediately. Understood. Understood. Marcus stood as well, his expression showing something she had never seen before. Gratitude that asked for nothing in return. Thank you. Do not thank me, Eleanor replied. This is not a gift. It is a test. And the passing grade requires years of consistent behavior, not one successful meeting. I understand. Saturday, she said. 10 in the morning. Do not be late. She walked out without looking back. Saturday morning arrived with a kind of autumn clarity that made everything feel significant. Eleanor had prepared as carefully as she knew how. The apartment was clean. The girls were dressed in comfortable play clothes. Toys were available. Snacks were accessible. Everything was arranged to minimize stress and maximize the chances of a positive first encounter. Lily, Jamie, and Rose had no idea what was about to happen. They knew only that someone was coming to visit, that Mama said it was important, that they should be their usual selves. Eleanor watched them play while she waited. 3 distinct personalities emerging more clearly every day. Lily arranging blocks with careful precision. Jamie attempting to climb furniture she had been told repeatedly not to climb. Rose narrating an elaborate story to her stuffed animals in language only she fully understood. These are his daughters, Eleanor thought. His blood. His features reflected in their faces. And he has never held them. Never heard them laugh. Never comforted them when they cried. By his own choice. The doorbell rang at precisely 10 o'clock. Eleanor took a breath, crossed to the door, and opened it. Marcus stood in the hallway holding nothing. No gifts. No toys. No attempt to buy his way into his daughter's affection. Just himself, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. They are in the living room, Eleanor said. Follow me. She led him through the small apartment, aware of how modest it must seem compared to the spaces he inhabited. The kitchen they passed through was functional but cramped. The hallway was narrow. Everything was clean and organized, but nothing was expensive. Marcus noticed none of it. His attention was fixed entirely on what waited ahead. They entered the living room. 3 small faces turned toward the doorway. For a moment, nothing happened. The girls looked at the stranger with the curiosity children reserve for unfamiliar adults. Not fear. Not excitement. Just the neutral observation of young humans encountering something new. Marcus stood frozen. Eleanor watched his face as he looked at his daughters for the first time. Watched 18 months of absence crash into him all at once. Watched him see his mother's nose on Lily's face, his sister's eyes looking back at him from Jamie, his own mouth curved into Rose's hesitant smile. She saw him understand, fully and finally, what he had missed. What he had chosen to miss. What his cruelty had cost him. Tears streamed down his face. Lily noticed first. She pointed at Marcus with the directness of a toddler. "Why is the man crying?" she asked Eleanor. Eleanor knelt beside her daughter. "Sometimes grown-ups cry when they feel very big feelings," she explained gently. "Happy feelings and sad feelings all mixed together. Is he happy or sad?" Eleanor looked at Marcus, who was clearly struggling to compose himself. "I think he is both," she said. "This is Marcus. He knew Mama a long time ago. He wanted very much to meet you." Jamie had already lost interest and returned to her climbing attempts. Rose continued watching Marcus with her sensitive, observant eyes. Lily seemed to accept the explanation and returned to her blocks. Marcus wiped his face with trembling hands. "May I sit down?" he asked, his voice unsteady. "Yes," Eleanor said. "On the floor, so you are at their level." He lowered himself to the carpet, crossing his legs, making himself small and non-threatening. Eleanor watched him carefully, ready to intervene at any sign of distress from the girls. For several minutes, nothing significant happened. The girls played. Marcus Saturday, Eleanor observed. The ordinariness of it was almost disappointing after the emotional intensity of the past weeks. Then Rose approached. She toddled over to where Marcus sat and stopped directly in front of him. Her eyes studied his face with an intensity that seemed older than her 18 months. "Hello," Marcus said softly. Rose did not reply. Instead, she reached out one small hand and touched his cheek where tears had left traces. "Wet," she observed. "Yes," Marcus managed. "I was crying." "Why?" He considered how to answer a question that contained 18 months of failure. "Because I am very happy to meet you," he said finally. "And very sad that it took me so long to get here." Rose seemed to accept this explanation. She nodded once, then toddled back to her stuffed animals and resumed her elaborate narrative. Marcus looked at Eleanor with an expression of complete devastation. "She is so beautiful," he whispered. "They all are. I know. I missed so much." "Yes, you did. How do I recover from that?" Eleanor watched her daughters play. "You do not recover," she said quietly. "Recovery implies returning to a previous state. There is no previous state with them. There is only forward. You missed their births, their first breaths, their first smiles, their first words, their first steps. You cannot recover those moments. They are gone." Marcus flinched. "What you can do," Eleanor continued, "is be present for what comes next. First days of school. First friendships. First heartbreaks. First achievements. The years ahead contain millions of moments. You can be there for those. If you choose to be. I will be there. You say that now. When it feels urgent. When the guilt is fresh. The question is whether you will still be there when the guilt fades. When their needs become inconvenient. When your life presents competing priorities. I will be there," Marcus repeated. "We will see." Jamie had noticed the adult conversation and decided it was boring. She resumed her climbing attempts with renewed determination. Lily continued her precise block arrangements. Rose told stories to her stuffed animals. 3 children living their ordinary morning while their father sat among them for the first time. Eleanor allowed the visit to continue for an hour. Marcus did not try to force interaction. He sat on the floor, made himself available, and let the girls approach on their own terms. Lily eventually showed him her block tower. Jamie demanded he watch her climb and then fall safely onto cushions. Rose brought him a stuffed rabbit and instructed him on proper rabbit care protocols. By the end of the hour, something had shifted. The girls were not treating Marcus as a stranger anymore. He was simply another adult in their space, one who sat on the floor and paid attention to their important activities. "It is time for their nap," Eleanor said finally. "You should go." Marcus stood reluctantly. "When can I come back?" he asked. "Next Saturday. Same time. Same conditions." "Thank you." "Stop thanking me," Eleanor replied. "Start earning the access you are being given." Marcus walked to the door. He paused before leaving, looking back at the living room where 3 small people were already being herded toward their bedroom. They are extraordinary, he said quietly. I know. You have done an extraordinary job with them. I know that too. Marcus left. Eleanor closed the door behind him and leaned against it for a moment, allowing herself to feel the complexity of what had just happened. Her daughters had met their father. It had not been terrible. But it had not been redemption either. Redemption, if it came at all, would take years of consistent presence. Years of proving that the man who left would become a man who stayed. She returned to the living room and began the nap routine, pushing thoughts of Marcus aside to focus on what mattered most. 3 small children who needed their mother's undivided attention. Everything else could wait. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Marcus came every Saturday. Same time. Same conditions. He sat on the floor. He followed the girl's lead. He did not bring expensive gifts or attempt to buy affection. He simply showed up and was present. Eleanor watched with the vigilance of someone who had learned not to trust beautiful appearances. She looked for signs of performance. Signs that his attention was manufactured for her benefit rather than genuinely given to the children. Signs that he was calculating rather than connecting. She found none. Marcus seemed authentically absorbed by his daughters. He learned their preferences and rhythms. Lily liked structure and predictability. Jamie liked physical activity and risk. Rose liked imagination and storytelling. He adapted his interactions to match each child's needs. By the 3rd visit, the girls were greeting him by name when he arrived. By the 5th visit, Rose was insisting he participate in her elaborate narrative games. By the 8th visit, Jamie was using him as a climbing structure while Lily directed the construction of increasingly complex block towers. Eleanor found herself reluctantly impressed. She had expected him to lose interest, to find the repetition boring, to prioritize more significant demands on his time. Instead, he arrived every Saturday with the same focused attention, the same willingness to engage on the girls' terms, the same apparent satisfaction in simply being present. One evening, after the girls were asleep, Eleanor allowed herself to examine her own feelings. She was not falling back in love with Marcus. That door had closed permanently when he accused her of manipulation. What she had felt for him had been destroyed by his cruelty, and she had no desire to rebuild it. But she was developing something else. A grudging respect for his commitment to change. An acknowledgment that people could, in fact, transform themselves if the motivation was genuine. A cautious belief that her daughters might benefit from knowing their father after all. It was not forgiveness. She did not know if she would ever forgive him. Forgiveness seemed like too generous a word for what he had done. But it was something. A willingness to allow the process to continue. To see what time would reveal about this man who was trying to become someone different. The conversation about expanding access happened after 3 months of Saturday visits. Marcus requested a meeting separate from his time with the girls. Eleanor agreed, curious about what he would ask. They met at the same conference room where their first post-gala conversation had occurred. Same neutral space. Same chairs facing each other. Same air of negotiation between people who had learned to be careful with each other. I want to talk about what comes next, Marcus said. I assumed that was why you requested this meeting. I have been consistent, he continued. Every Saturday. No cancellations. No competing priorities. I have done what you asked. You have, Eleanor acknowledged. I would like to spend more time with them. Not just Saturdays. Other days as well. Events that matter. Holidays. Birthdays. Eleanor considered his request. You understand that expanding access requires expanding trust, she said. And trust cannot be rushed. I understand. I am not asking for unsupervised time. I am asking for more opportunities to be present. To be part of their lives beyond one morning per week. What specifically are you proposing? Wednesday evenings, Marcus said. I would come after work. Have dinner with all of you. Help with bedtime routines. Leave when they are asleep. And holiday gatherings. Their birthday is approaching. I would like to be there. Eleanor studied him. What have you done to earn this? She asked. Beyond the Saturday visits? Marcus met her eyes. I have continued therapy. Continued volunteering. Continued examining my failures and trying to understand them. I have not fallen back into old patterns. I have maintained the changes I committed to. Those things are for you, Eleanor replied. Not for them. They are for becoming someone worthy of being their father. Is that not the same thing? Not exactly. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. The girls do not care whether you attend therapy. They care whether you show up when you say you will. They care whether you remember what they told you last time. They care whether you make them feel valued and safe. I believe I have done those things. You have, she acknowledged. But 3 months is a beginning, Marcus. Not an arrival. How long until you believe I have arrived? I do not know. Eleanor's voice softened slightly. That is the honest answer. I do not know how long trust takes to rebuild after the kind of damage you caused. I suspect it takes longer than either of us would prefer. Then what do I do in the meantime? You continue, Eleanor said. You keep showing up. You prove through accumulated evidence that you have actually changed. You accept that the timeline is not yours to control. Marcus absorbed this. So the answer to my request is no. The answer to your request is not yet. Eleanor stood. I am not punishing you with restrictions. I am protecting my daughters from potential disappointment. If you truly have changed, that change will remain stable. You can prove it over additional months. Then we can revisit this conversation. Marcus stood as well. That is fair, he said quietly. I do not like it. But it is fair. Your feelings about fairness are not my primary concern. I know. He paused at the door. Eleanor, I want you to know that I am not going anywhere. However long this takes. Whatever conditions you set. I am committed to this. We will see, she replied. But something in her voice had shifted slightly. The absolute certainty of his failure had eroded just enough to allow for other possibilities. She was not ready to believe in him yet. But she was no longer entirely certain that disbelief was the only rational option. The birthday arrived in early spring. Lily, Jamie, and Rose were turning 2. Eleanor had planned a small celebration at her apartment. Family, friends. Other mothers from her support network. Grace, who had become a permanent fixture in their lives since the shelter days. Marcus had asked again about attending. Eleanor had considered the request for a week before responding. She said yes. The party was modest by any standard Marcus would have known. Homemade cake. Simple decorations. Gifts purchased on careful budgets. Nothing that would impress a billionaire accustomed to extravagance. Marcus arrived with 3 small wrapped packages. Eleanor examined them before allowing them to be given. Books, she observed. Age-appropriate picture books. I asked the staff at the children's bookstore for recommendations, Marcus said. I did not know what they already had. I hope there is no duplication. There was no duplication. Eleanor allowed the gifts to join the others. The party proceeded with the happy chaos of toddler celebrations. The girls were overwhelmed by attention and cake and presents. They crashed hard afterward, falling asleep in tangled piles while the adult guests helped clean up. Marcus stayed to assist. He washed dishes, collected trash, moved furniture back to its original positions. When the work was done, Eleanor found him standing by the window, looking at the sleeping girls on the couch. They do not know what today means, he said quietly. Too young to understand birthdays. They understand cake, Eleanor replied. That is enough for now. 2 years. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. They have been alive for 2 years. I missed half of it. You did. I cannot recover that time. No. He turned to face her. But I can be present for the next 16 years. And the years after that. And whatever comes following. I can be there for graduations and heartbreaks and achievements and failures. I can be the father I should have been from the beginning. You can try, Eleanor said. I will do more than try. I will succeed. Because failure is not acceptable. Because they deserve better than what I have given them so far. Because I refuse to be the absence in their lives that my father was in mine. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. I believe you mean that, she said finally. I do. But meaning something and achieving it are different things. You know that. I know. He met her eyes. But I have spent my entire life achieving things others said were impossible. Building an empire from modest beginnings. Surviving losses that should have destroyed me. If I can do those things, I can do this too. Those things were about accumulation, Eleanor replied. This is about consistency. About showing up day after day when no one is watching. About being reliable in boring, ordinary ways that do not generate applause. I understand the difference now. Marcus's voice was quiet. I did not understand it before. I thought success was about visible achievement. Measurable outcomes. Things you could point to and say, look what I built. And now I understand that real success is invisible. It is the accumulated weight of a million small choices. It is being there when being there is not convenient. It is prioritizing people over accomplishments. It is building trust through years of reliability rather than moments of grand gesture. Eleanor felt something shift in her assessment of him. That is the first thing you have said that makes me think you might actually have changed. I have changed. I am still changing. I will continue changing. Because the man I was cannot be the father they deserve. And I refuse to fail them the way I failed everyone else. The sleeping girls stirred slightly on the couch. Rose made a small sound and resettled. Lily pulled Jamie closer in her sleep. 3 children who had never chosen their father. Who would live with the consequences of his choices regardless of their own preferences. Who deserved better than the man who had rejected them before they were born. Marcus watched them with an expression Eleanor had never seen on his face before. Total devotion without expectation of return. Love that asked for nothing because it had forfeited the right to ask. Whatever you need me to do, he said quietly. Whatever timeline you require. Whatever conditions you set. I will meet them all. Because they are worth it. They are worth everything. Eleanor believed him. She was not ready to say it aloud. Not ready to grant him the relief of her acknowledgment. But somewhere deep in the fortress she had built around her heart, a small gate had opened. She believed him. And that was a beginning. Wednesday evenings began 2 weeks later. Marcus arrived after work with groceries. He cooked dinner while Eleanor supervised, and the girls created elaborate chaos around them both. They ate together at the small table, navigating the particular challenges of feeding toddlers. Marcus cleaned up while Eleanor started bedtime routines. He read stories while she prepared the next day's necessities. Then he left. Every Wednesday. Without fail. For months that accumulated into something resembling normalcy. The girls adjusted to his presence as children do. He became simply another feature of their landscape. Marcus who came on Saturdays. Marcus who cooked on Wednesdays. Marcus who smelled like something different than Mama and who was very tall and who made funny faces when he thought no one was watching. They did not call him Dad. Eleanor had not instructed them about what to call him. She was waiting to see what emerged naturally. Waiting to see if the relationship would earn the title or whether the title would remain unclaimed. For now, they called him Marcus. He seemed to accept this without difficulty. Seemed to understand that fatherhood was not a name but a function. That he had to become their father through action before he deserved to be called one. The months passed. Eleanor's consulting business grew. The blog continued to draw followers and sponsors. The apartment felt less cramped as she adjusted to its dimensions. Life had stabilized into something that approached genuine comfort. Marcus remained constant. No cancelled visits. No competing priorities that superseded his time with the girls. No signs of the impatience or boredom that Eleanor had expected to eventually emerge. She began to believe that his change might be permanent. The conversation about her feelings happened unexpectedly, almost a year after the gala. Marcus had just left after a Wednesday evening. The girls were asleep. Eleanor sat in her quiet living room processing the strangeness of her current existence. A year ago, she had been in a shelter, pregnant with triplets, alone in ways she had never anticipated. Now she had a stable home, a growing business, 3 healthy daughters, and the consistent presence of a man she had once loved and then despised and now felt something complicated toward that she could not easily name. She did not love him anymore. That was certain. The love had been destroyed by his cruelty and could not be rebuilt. But she respected him. Reluctantly. Against her preference. She respected the sustained effort he had applied to his transformation. The consistency of his presence. The genuine devotion he showed their daughters. It was not nothing. She did not know what it was. But it was not nothing. Grace called to check in, as Grace did every few weeks. "How are things?" the older woman asked. "Complicated," Eleanor replied. "Complicated how?" Eleanor considered how to explain. "He has changed," she said. "I did not expect him to. I expected him to lose interest or reveal his true nature or find some way to disappoint me and confirm everything I believed about him. Instead, he has been consistent for almost a year. Present. Reliable. Everything he claimed he would be. And that is complicated because I do not know what to do with it." Eleanor paused. "I built my entire understanding of him around his cruelty, his abandonment, his betrayal of my trust. If those things are no longer definitive, who is he? And who am I in relation to someone I do not recognize anymore?" Grace was quiet for a moment. "People change," she said finally. "Not always. Not often. But sometimes. The question is not whether he has changed, but whether his change creates space for you to change as well." "What do you mean?" "You have been protected by your anger," Grace said. "It has served you well. Kept you focused. Kept you from wasting energy on someone who did not deserve it. But if he is genuinely different now, the anger might be protecting you from something you no longer need protection from." "I do not love him anymore." "I did not say anything about love. I said change. Growth. Openness. These are not the same as love. They are the preconditions for any kind of genuine relationship, romantic or otherwise." Eleanor considered this. "I do not know if I can trust him." "Trust is built through time," Grace replied. "You know this already. You have been testing him for a year, and he has passed every test. That does not mean the testing is finished. But it might mean you can relax the vigilance slightly. Allow yourself to believe what the evidence is showing you. And if I am wrong, if I relax and he reveals his true nature and I have allowed myself to be vulnerable again, then you will survive," Grace said simply. "As you have survived everything else. Survival is what you do, Eleanor. It is who you are. But survival is not living. Eventually, you might want to try living as well." The words echoed something Marcus had said years ago, before everything fell apart. "Perhaps we have both been surviving when we could have been living." He had said that in his office, in the darkness, before he kissed her and changed everything. She had believed him then and been devastated by his betrayal. Could she believe him again? Should she? "I need to think about this," Eleanor told Grace. "Of course. Take whatever time you need. Just remember that time spent thinking is also time passing. And life does not wait for us to feel ready." After the call ended, Eleanor sat in silence for a long while. The girls slept peacefully in the next room. The apartment hummed with the quiet machinery of existence. Outside, the city continued its endless motion. She had built a life from wreckage. Had constructed something stable and meaningful from the ruins of Marcus's betrayal. Had proven that survival was possible even when survival seemed impossible. But Grace was right. Survival was not living. At some point, she would have to decide whether living was something she was willing to risk. The decision came slowly, unfolding over additional months of observation. Marcus continued his consistency. Continued showing up. Continued being present in ways that accumulated into something undeniable. The girls had started calling him Daddy. It happened naturally, without instruction or prompting. Rose used the word first, during a Wednesday dinner, asking for Daddy to pass her cup. Eleanor had frozen momentarily. Marcus had passed the cup without making a significant moment of it. After that, all three used the name. Daddy who came on Saturdays. Daddy who cooked on Wednesdays. Daddy who was part of their lives in ways that now seemed permanent. Eleanor watched Marcus's reaction to the name each time it was used. Watched for signs of triumph or possession or any hint that he was claiming something he had not earned. She saw only gratitude. Only careful joy. Only the restrained emotion of a man who understood that the name was a gift he was receiving, not a right he was asserting. He has changed, she finally admitted to herself. Against all expectation. Against all prior evidence about who he was. He has actually, genuinely changed. The admission did not resolve her complicated feelings. Did not suddenly restore the love that had been destroyed. Did not erase the 18 months of abandonment and cruelty and desperate survival. But it allowed her to consider possibilities she had previously refused to contemplate. The conversation happened on a Saturday afternoon, after the girls had been picked up by Grace for an outing, leaving Eleanor and Marcus alone for the first time since their relationship had imploded years before. "We need to talk," Eleanor said. Marcus set down the toy he had been organizing. His expression became careful, guarded. "About what?" "About what happens next." He waited. "You have been consistent," Eleanor said. "I need to acknowledge that. Every test I set, you passed. Every expectation I established, you met. I did not believe it was possible for you to change as completely as you appear to have changed. I was wrong." Marcus remained silent, allowing her to continue. "I'm not saying I forgive you," Eleanor clarified. "Forgiveness is not something I can grant on demand. It may come eventually or it may not. I do not control that process. I understand. What I am saying is that I believe your change is genuine, and that our daughters deserve a father who is fully present in their lives, not restricted to scheduled visits and supervised interactions." Marcus's expression shifted to something she could not read. "What are you proposing?" "A new arrangement," Eleanor said. "You would have the girls 1 weekend per month. Overnight. At your residence, which I will need to approve beforehand. You would be responsible for their care during those periods. Meals. Bedtime. Everything." She paused. "Additionally, you would be invited to holiday gatherings and family events as a matter of course rather than special exception. You would be consulted on major decisions affecting their welfare. You would be recognized as their father in all meaningful ways." Marcus sat very still. "What about us?" he asked quietly. "There is no us," Eleanor replied. "Not in the way you are asking. What we had was destroyed by what you did. I do not hate you anymore. I may even respect the person you have become. But I will not be in a romantic relationship with you. That door closed permanently when you accused me of manipulation. I understand. I am offering co-parenting," Eleanor said. "Genuine co-parenting between two people who prioritize their children's welfare. Cooperation and communication and shared decision-making. Nothing more." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "That is more than I deserve," he said finally. "More than I dared hope for." "It is what the girls deserve," Eleanor replied. "They deserve parents who can work together, who can be in the same room without tension, who can present a united front on matters of importance. I am offering that. Whether it is more than you deserve is not really the point." "No, it is not." Marcus met her eyes. "I accept your offer. Completely. Without reservation. Whatever terms you set, I will meet them." "Good." Eleanor stood. "Then we will proceed from here." She extended her hand. Marcus looked at it for a moment. Then he stood and took it. A handshake. A business arrangement between two people who would share the raising of 3 children. Not romance. Not forgiveness. Not restoration of what had been destroyed. But something. Something that might grow into genuine partnership over the years ahead. Something that would serve their daughter's needs. It was enough. It would have to be enough. Because sometimes, after everything falls apart, enough is all that remains. The epilogue unfolded over years that moved faster than either of them anticipated. The girls grew from toddlers to children, developing personalities and preferences and inner lives that surprised their parents with their complexity. Lily became the careful one. The planner. The child who organized her siblings and managed household logistics with a precision that reminded Eleanor uncomfortably of herself. Jamie became the athlete. The adventurer. The child who climbed everything and ran everywhere and treated fear as a challenge to overcome rather than a warning to heed. Rose became the artist. The dreamer. The child who saw the world through lenses the adults around her could not access and created beauty from ordinary materials. Marcus was present for all of it. Every school play. Every sports event. Every parent-teacher conference. Every moment of triumph and every moment of failure. He showed up with the consistency he had promised, proving through accumulated years that his change was permanent. Eleanor watched him become the father he should have been from the beginning. Watched him learn from his mistakes with his first children and avoid repeating them with his second chance. Watched him prioritize his daughters over his business, over his reputation, over everything that had once consumed his attention. She did not fall back in love with him. That door remained closed, sealed by memory of his cruelty that no amount of subsequent redemption could erase. But she became his partner in parenting, his ally in raising their daughters, his cooperator in the endless logistics of family life. They attended school events together. They celebrated holidays in shared spaces. They consulted each other on discipline and education and social development. They presented the united front she had promised, two people who had found their way to functional collaboration despite the wreckage of their history. The girls asked about their story sometimes. Asked why Mommy and Daddy did not live together like other parents. Asked what had happened to create their unusual arrangement. Eleanor told them truth appropriate to their ages. Daddy was not ready to be a father when you were born, she explained when they were old enough to understand. He made mistakes. He was not there when Mommy needed him. But he has spent every day since trying to make up for those mistakes. What matters now is that he loves you completely and shows up for you always. The girls accepted this explanation with the resilience of children who had never known anything different. Their family looked unusual compared to their friends' families. But it was their normal, and they loved both their parents, and that was enough. Marcus never stopped trying to earn what he had forfeited. Years after their arrangement began, he still showed up early for every scheduled exchange. Still called to check in on nights when the girls were with Eleanor. Still deferred to her judgment on matters large and small, understanding that his voice in their daughters' lives had been regained through grace rather than right. She appreciated his humility, respected his continued consistency, grew to trust him in ways she had never imagined possible after the devastation of his betrayal. And sometimes, late at night when the girls were asleep and the apartment was quiet and she had time to reflect on the strange journey her life had taken, Eleanor allowed herself to feel something adjacent to gratitude. Not for Marcus specifically. Not for the man who had abandoned her and accused her and left her homeless and pregnant. But for what had emerged from that destruction. For the strength she had discovered in herself. For the community that had supported her survival. For the life she had built from nothing but determination. And yes, for the fact that her daughters would grow up knowing their father after all. That the man who had rejected them before their birth had become someone worth knowing. That change, improbable as it seemed, had actually occurred. It was not the ending she had imagined when she stood in his office 18 months pregnant, hearing him tell her to handle the baby alone. But perhaps it was a better ending. An ending that proved survival was possible. That redemption, though rare, was real. That families could form in unexpected configurations and still provide love and stability and everything children needed to thrive. The girls turned 10 on a spring morning full of sunlight and possibility. Eleanor and Marcus stood together in her apartment, watching their daughters tear into birthday presents with the enthusiasm that 10-year-olds bring to such occasions. They did not hold hands. Did not stand too close. Maintained the careful distance of co-parents rather than partners. But they smiled at each other. Shared the joy of this moment. Recognized together what they had built from the ashes of what had been destroyed. "We did it," Marcus said quietly. "We did," Eleanor agreed. "They are extraordinary." "I know." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me be part of this. For giving me the chance to become someone worth knowing. For not closing the door forever when I gave you every reason to." Eleanor looked at him. At this man who had once destroyed her world. Who had spent years rebuilding himself into someone unrecognizable from the monster of that office. Who was now her partner in raising 3 remarkable children. "You earned it," she said simply. And that was the truth. He had earned it. Through years of consistency. Through unwavering presence. Through the slow, patient work of proving that change was real and permanent and meant for more than just his own redemption. He had earned the right to stand in this room, on this morning, watching his daughters celebrate another year of life. And Eleanor had earned the peace she felt watching him be there. Earned it through her own survival. Through her own strength. Through her own determination to build something beautiful from wreckage. They had both earned this moment. And that, perhaps, was the real miracle. Not forgiveness, though something like it had grown over time. Not romance, though respect had deepened into something resembling genuine care. Just two people who had hurt each other terribly, who had somehow found their way to something better, who were raising 3 children together with love and consistency and everything those children needed. It was not perfect, but it was real. And real, in the end, was all that mattered. The birthday party continued around them. 3 10-year-olds shrieked with excitement over presents and cake. Friends ran through the small apartment, creating joyful chaos. The noise was tremendous and wonderful. Eleanor caught Marcus's eye across the room. He smiled at her. She smiled back. And in that small exchange, a decade of healing was acknowledged without words. They had survived what should have destroyed them both. They had become something better than what they were. And their daughters, the 3 lives that had once seemed impossible, were thriving. That was the ending. That was the only ending that mattered. Not dramatic confrontation. Not explosive revelation. Not the satisfaction of seeing an enemy destroyed. Just 3 children blowing out candles on a birthday cake, their parents standing nearby, a family that had formed against all odds, continuing together into whatever came next. The end.